Muslim Ethnicities and Diaspora Studies program and the Department of Race and Resistance Studies. And I want to thank Margarita Gallagher for her work coordinating the logistics around today's visit, and the National Boricua Human Rights Network, who is organizing Mr. Oscar Lopez Rivera's tour. So now please join me in giving a warm welcome to Luis Alejandro Molina of the National Boricua Human Rights Network.
So I think what is important, and I'll be brief, is how many people here are 35 years old or younger? Raise your hand. So it's especially important to us when we start these sort of discussions that people realize you were not born when Oscar went to prison. To spend a whole lifetime, and of that 35, well really 36 years, 12 years and 2 months were spent in segregation, where the only person he saw was a guard. Right? And I say that because in spite of that, in the discussion, and you'll have ample time for question and answer, it's important that Oscar and Oscar's life in sort of the geohistorical pattern of the U.S., of the ups and the roller coaster of expansion, right, is how Puerto Rico and people like Oscar, because there are more Oscars, right, and have played a role. And at some point internationally, right, how Puerto Rico saw itself from the 60s to the 90s, how we successfully removed the Navy from Vieques, right, after more than 6 decades of struggle. But I say that because I invite you to think about the questions you're going to ask, because with us I've been visiting Oscar since he was arrested, the year he was arrested in 1989. But I say that because it's important that the capacity of a movement to build solidarity, to build awareness, even in the diaspora, and that's what this tour in itself is about, is really important. If you are a Latino, Latina, Latinx, if you're a Puerto Rican, right, you have to figure out at some point in your life, right, what is your relationship to Puerto Rico, to the U.S., because it's a problem that has not been resolved historically. And as long as it's not been resolved, it will insist on being resolved, right? So I say that, and just to give a small introduction, you all hopefully know, and if not, I'll make available to Katina the 2 books in PDF format, free of charge. He wrote a series of letters during the last years of his imprisonment to his granddaughter. It's called Cartas a Karina. And it's amazing why I became a vegetarian in prison, right? Why this and why I did what I did, why I'm in prison. Now his granddaughter, an amazing young woman in herself, doesn't get to touch physically, right, her grandfather until she's 9 years old. She's visiting from the time she's 4 months old, but there's no touching, right? So one of the most heartbreaking stories at that moment was when they would touch on the plexiglass screen like this, right, to be able to say hi as she grew up. At 9 years old is the first contact visit, and she doesn't know what to do. So she puts her hand up, right, when Oscar goes to hug her, and he catches on right away and he puts his hand up. And then they come together and hug, right? But I say this because I see there is no one prison, no prison system that the power of a struggle for human rights cannot overcome, right? Oscar is proof of that. Mumia and Leonard will be proof of that, right? Our comrades in the Palestinian movement are proof of that. So with that, I give you Oscar Lopez Rivera.
I don't know how far my voice would reach people, but I'm going to try my best. I'm a small person, and usually on the 25th of July, 1898, the United States government occupied, invaded militarily Puerto Rico, and ever since then, Puerto Rico has been a colony of the United States. In 1898, Puerto Rico, at that particular moment, Puerto Rico was already trading with European countries, was trading with the Caribbean countries, was trading with Central, South America, and even in the United States, up to that moment. And for a short period of time, Puerto Rico was enjoying its own self-government. The minute that the United States government appoints a governor, and this is 1898, a governor to govern Puerto Rico, this is President McKinley appointed this man. And the first thing that this man said was Puerto Ricans are incapable of self-government because they're not Aryans. Only Aryans, according to him, were capable of self-government. So the denial starts right there. And in 121 years, Puerto Ricans have not had a self-government. We are right now, if you check it out, if you look it up, Puerto Rico is under the control of the United States Congress. Everything that happens in Puerto Rico, of course, is the U.S. Congress that can decide what's going on in Puerto Rico. One of the best examples of that is what happened with Ley Promesa that was probably pushed and accepted by President Obama, unfortunately, but it was passed. And that Ley Promesa was supposed, allegedly, to help Puerto Rico deal with a debt, a $74 billion odious and criminal debt. Odious and criminal because no Puerto Rican can tell us where that debt started, who had the money, who spent the money, or what the money was spent. Nobody knows. We've asked over and over for there to be an audit of the debt, and thus far we have fallen in debt ears. The court system of the United States has said no, they're not going to deal with it. So that's one way of looking at what happens in Puerto Rico by the force and the strength of the U.S. Congress. So I'm moving back and forth. In 1898 again, the same man declared that Puerto Ricans were a mongrel race and that we were a lazy, dirty people. So that's probably, when I hear Donald Trump talk about Puerto Rico, he's probably repeating the same words of that man. So 121 years, we have a president who's almost identical to that governor and to President McKinley in 1898. Now, if a colony, there is no such thing as democracy in a colony. There is no such thing as a democratic government in any colony. There is no such thing as freedom. All we know is that colonialism dehumanizes, is very oppressive, very destructive, and it is a criminal enterprise, because it is an enterprise. These criminals, according to international law, colonialism is a crime against humanity. And imagine having a people that for 121 years have not had the right to exercise their self-determination. I hope that every single one of you has experienced that right of self-determination, because you will know that if you vote, if you choose a particular way of life, anything that you do as a human being is usually based on that self-determination. Puerto Ricans have not been allowed to exercise their self-determination. A violation of a very fundamental human right, because every human being, according to law, has the right to exercise that exercise of self-determination. Now, if we were to look at Puerto Rico 121 years ago, and if we were to look at Puerto Rico today, rather than the situation getting better, it never got better. One of the first things under the Forger Act that they pointed out, this is pointed out that Puerto Rico was densely populated. And Puerto Ricans should be probably pushed out. And by 1901, Puerto Ricans will be sent to Hawaii and will be sent to the southwest states of the United States. Very few people know this. But I have had the honor of meeting one Puerto Rican young woman whose family arrived in Hawaii in the group of people of 1901. And she was, when she met my mother, she was very happy to tell my mother that she was good at making pasteles. and she said it in Spanish. She didn't speak much English, but it was real nice hearing her say that, because Puerto Rico, at least, they have been able to maintain some of their culture, some of their way of life, even in Hawaii. So when we look at how those 121 years what we have endured, it's a horrible thing. I am going to jump into the experiments that have been conducted in Puerto Rico. Puerto Ricans have been used as guinea pigs, especially the Puerto Rican movement. It started just around early 1920s, the whole thing of sterilization. And 35% of the Puerto Rican women between the ages of 20 and 35 were sterilized. So some people probably say there, well, that's nothing. But imagine that being done to a dear friend of ours, to a mother, to a sister. After that, they used the Puerto Rican woman for the contraceptive pill. And again, as a guinea pig, the Puerto Rican woman was used for that experiment. Some probably think there is nothing. Another experiment that was conducted was by a man who was sent by none other than John D. Rockefeller to Puerto Rico, and he was supposed to be doing experiments with cancer cells. And this man was so full of hatred over the Puerto Ricans who he was supposed to be treating and experimenting with. For him, he said, well, I don't care if they live or die. I'm conducting my experiments. In other words, we were dispensable. We have always been dispensable. We have always been that element that can be used and destroyed and played with. And so he wrote a letter telling a friend of his that he had killed 8 Puerto Ricans. And he was very, very satisfied with that. And that letter went public. And probably the Puerto Rican who has done more for Puerto Rico than anyone else, than any other leader, at that time he was already the president of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party. His name is Dr. Pedro Albizu Campos, who graduated from Harvard University, was a lawyer, who became, in World War I, a lieutenant, served in the military, but by 1920 he was fed up already with what was going on in Puerto Rico. And he chose to join the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, and by 1930 he was the president of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party. And he had done a 3-year peregrination, starting in the Dominican Republic and ending all the way in South America. And during those 3 years that he was doing that, he was able to gather quite a bit of support for the cause of Puerto Rican independence. In every country, from the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, Mexico, all the way down to Argentina. Now, he got a hold of that letter, and that letter went public. And he condemned that attitude of a person who hated so much Puerto Rico. It is that thing of hatred. It is that thing of, you know, like the white supremacy. It's that whole thing of the mental, the twisted mind that he had. That also some of the people who govern in this country today have the same mindset, the same aspiration, same hatred, same fear mongers. So we have that experiment. We have another experiment with Agent Orange. Puerto Rico has the only rainforest in the Caribbean. And all of a sudden, they decided, just before going to Vietnam, to start experimenting with Agent Orange right there. It's a beautiful place. It's probably one of the most beautiful places in the Caribbean. And it was used as an experimental area for Agent Orange. Anyone who has seen Agent Orange, and I feel sometimes that I have been a victim of Agent Orange, but I've seen the real victims of Agent Orange, and it's something that is terrible to see. Especially if we go to Vietnam right now, we see children being born, victims of Agent Orange. Anyway, it was used, Puerto Rico was used for the experiment of Agent Orange. And then when they had depleted uranium, they went to Vieques and used depleted uranium as an experiment. So when we look at the amount of experiments that have been conducted and have been used in Puerto Rico, this is a scary, is a thing that, and something that should make us think of how us human beings can be so cruel, so twisted in our minds. So this is what Puerto Rico has had to go through, just with experiments. But we should also look at the other areas. In 1916, Ley Promesa went into effect. And Ley Promesa was allegedly supposed to help Puerto Rico to come out of a debt that was odious, a debt that is criminal. Because odious and criminal, no Puerto Rican knows how the money was spent, who spent it, where did that money go to, what good did it do for Puerto Rico. There's not a single thing that I can point out, or anyone can point out, that the money, the $74 billion, no one can say, hey, I know how it was spent. And the reason we cannot know is because in 1984, the Congress of the United States passed a law denying Puerto Rico the right to use the bankruptcy system that other places in the United States, New York State, used it in the early 70s, the mid 70s, and Detroit, Michigan was allowed to use it. But we are not, after that law, we cannot use bankruptcy. So they imposed on us a fiscal control board, and that fiscal control board is made up of 7 people. Each one of them has a vested interest in making sure that the debt is paid. Not benefit for Puerto Rico, but to make sure that the debt is paid. And since then, we can look at how they've gone about it. This year, the University of Puerto Rico's budget will be cut by $500 million. And that means automatically that those students who have been forced to pay tuition fee higher and higher and higher during the 4 or 5 years. And they will be the ones who will suffer the consequences of those $500 million, the debt already the fiscal control board took to pay the debt. And at the same time, the fiscal control board is working, looking for the retirement, the pension funds that go to teachers, that go to professors, that go to workers, and that is also being squeezed. And if we look at the things that they plan, they're trying right now to sell the what used to be a public corporation that was electrifying Puerto Rico. And that's supposed, they want to privatize it, to put it in private hands. And since I used the word, like privatize, I'm gonna say what privatization has done to Puerto Rico. If we go to Puerto Rico, we will see that a lot of the things that are there have been privatized. You arrive at the airport, it's in private hands. You take that highway, and it's in private hands, and you have to pay once you get into the highway. If you travel from San Juan into Carolina, you will find it's a bridge, the Moscoso. You get in the Moscoso, you use it for a mile, and you pay $3.50. And if you come back, that's $3.50 more. So in a day, you're going to be spending $7 just to use a 1 mile structure that was built with Puerto Rican sweat and tears, because it's a Puerto Rican worker primarily who pays for all that stuff. And we have to pay $3.50, and it's going up too. So these are the things that we face on a daily basis at this particular moment. And we can see what privatization has done. I remember the Puerto Rican telephone company being a very dynamic company that was bought from AT&T in 1973. It was completely refurbished, and that telephone company was functional. But the best thing was that it had work 24/7, and that the majority of the workers were Puerto Rican women, and they were getting a decent pay. And in 1998, the father of the governor that kicked out of office was the governor between 1982 and 2000. And he privatized hospitals, and he privatized Puerto Rico. If we go to Puerto Rico, one of the biggest problems that we have right now are health problems. We can go into a hospital in Puerto Rico right now, and at 9 o'clock in the morning, those hospitals are full, and probably some of those people who are waiting there will go to 8 o'clock at night, still waiting to get treated. And that just happened through the process of privatization. While those hospitals were public, we had many more doctors in Puerto Rico. Right now, probably there are more Puerto Rican doctors inside the United States than in Puerto Rico. More Puerto Rican nurses in the United States than nurses in Puerto Rico. We have a serious health problem due to the fact that those doctors who are providing service to Puerto Rico are no longer there. And the private corporations make money because privatization is the byproduct of privatizing what was public corporation here in the United States and then all over the world. If they have been able to create a phenomenon that takes over whatever it can. Everything in Puerto Rico, everything that was public has gone private. And one of the things that right now we see are the students suffering the pain of having to work, having to study, working for $5.50 in many places. Imagine any one of you working for $5.50, probably working 2 jobs because it's not enough just to pay for the tuition and for their needs, including a place to live. The big building that we have is like probably 30 stories high. They used to be where students were living, has been closed. And imagine how many of those students who did not have to pay before are now paying just to stay in the university. I remember University of Puerto Rico with probably close to 26,000 students. Right now, the University of Puerto Rico probably has 15,000 students at most. So what happens when we lose students? We are losing the most fundamental, the most important part, because it is education, it is through the education system that the human resource is developed. And the most important resource in this world is the human resource. It is not petroleum, it is not gold. The most precious one is the human resource. And if the human resource is used the proper way, we will definitely, right now, we will definitely would have a better and more just world. Unfortunately, it's not. So, probably when we look at gentrification, people buying in Puerto Rico, foreigners coming into Puerto Rico, taking advantage of a tax that allows any foreigner to come into Puerto Rico, buy property, and do not have to pay taxes for 25 years. If I were to buy a house now in Puerto Rico, I'll start paying taxes immediately. And the Puerto Rican small businesses have literally almost been wiped out. You know, I remember my hometown where we have quite enough pharmacies to satisfy the needs of my hometown. But Walgreens and CVS, for a small pharmacy to compete with Walgreens and CVS is impossible. So also the pharmacies that were servicing us 30, 40 years ago are gone. Many of them are gone. Some of them have stayed because they know how to fight, they know how to survive. But that is the reality that we live in Puerto Rico at this present moment. And if we cannot keep our kids in school, because between 2012 and the present, over 700 schools have been closed in Puerto Rico. So we can see who's getting pushed and who's getting pressed down, and it's probably the one that really is the working class, the poorest of the poor, the marginalized, the invisible, those who are invisible and without a voice. Those are the ones who are paying more and more. And I have been able to travel throughout Puerto Rico, and to see those buildings close is painful. And it's also painful to see kids who once had a school next to, very, very close to them, they have to travel an hour just to get to the place where they have been assigned to. So those are the things that I want to share with you. And probably we can go and get into the question period, because I think that the most important thing here is for us to have a dialogue, to be able to exchange, and to express ourselves, whether we're doing the wrong thing in Puerto Rico or whether we're doing the right thing in Puerto Rico. So for me, one of the things is that we're fighting for Puerto Rican independence. We want Puerto Rico to be an independent and sovereign nation, because that is the right of the Puerto Rican people. So let's go with the questions, and I hope that I can give you answers.
So before people want to stay in touch, I passed these around earlier, but take one. It's our social media, Oscar's social media, our webpage. There's a QR code, right? Take it away.
Questions? Yeah.
Well, maybe students have, and then I'll wait a little bit.
All right.
This is kind of like relating just you being in solitary confinement, but then relates to just like your whole movement. Like, what allowed you to continue going on and like not get through that breaking point? Because I've done research what mentally happens when you're in solitary confinement, and it's like very traumatic and it does a lot of like damage to somebody. So I'm curious of how you were able to still continue and have all this motivation and come out and do all this work while you were trapped for so many years and basically isolated from everything that was going on around.
We as human beings are empowered with certain energies. We are also empowered with the ability to transcend challenges, difficult moments. We can acclimate to very difficult environments. Experience gives us knowledge, and I'm a Vietnam veteran, and I went through a war, and I was in infantry for 7.5 months. So I survived that, and my survival was based on two things. I still had the love for people. I still had this idea that I could be of service to people, and Vietnam opened up my eyes to what a war is. And we did things, and I was part of the things that were terrible. One of the things that we were assigned to do was to go into a village, get into the houses, into the homes of Vietnamese. There would be probably 150 houses, and we would go in there and search and search and search, turn everything upside down. And then we would go to where the workers, the peasants, were working on the rice paddies or whatever it is that they were growing. We'd get them out of the work and start touching their bodies. We would be searching, body searching. But we're body searching the woman, we're body searching the man. And that's a very, very, I would say, because I could see the indignation on their faces and the anger. And just looking at the faces, and I had been told that our role in Vietnam was to bring democracy and freedom to the Vietnamese people. But they were not receiving any freedom and democracy. All we were doing was dehumanizing them. So, little by little, that experience was teaching me, forcing me to think what that meant if it had been my house and my place of work. Having your body all touched is something that is, I say, awful, and dehumanizing. So that was an experience that forced me to think in a different way, to start looking at life from a different perspective, and also the whole thing of people who are next to you being killed, and I'm alive, but that person is dead. And one of the things that mostly all of us who are in Vietnam will never forget is the body of the guy who was next to us, or the body of the guy who was very close to us. We didn't get to see him getting killed, but he was killed, and we found out later that he was killed, and he was no longer with us. The other thing that was very, very is how we were told, the way that when we were in training, what we were being told, and we were never told that there were Vietnamese people. There were the cooks, and I had never, seriously, before I went to the military, I had never heard that word. And let me tell you, I did not volunteer to go to Vietnam. so I wanna make this point too. As a Puerto Rican, I am forced to do military duty. And the day that I received Uncle Sam's letter, at the bottom of that letter, it said, if you do not report to the induction center on the specified day, you can face up to 5 years in federal prison. And at age 22, I was doing fairly well economically. I thought that I had the American dream by its tail. The least thing that I wanted to do was to go to federal prison. So I opted to go ahead and be drafted. And I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky for basic training, then I went to Fort Hood. And in 7.5 months, all I learned was how to kill. I was even trained to fire a missile with a nuclear warhead. On my records, there was a card that said, if a person who can fire a missile with a nuclear warhead, and my name was Oscar Lopez. So those are the first 7 months I have. Once the training was over, my next job was to be the battalion librarian, and a month later, I received my orders for Vietnam. I got to Vietnam, and all of a sudden, I had been reassigned from one place to the 1st Infantry Division, and for 7.5 months, I was an infantryman. And in infantry, what we were doing, we would go out on an operation. We could be 24 days, could be 30 days, and come back to the base. And for 2 days, we take showers and clean, whatever, and then back to another operation, and back to another operation, and back to another operation. And during those operations, sometimes we'll come under fire, and that's when we'll see those who are close to us, those who have become almost family, in my case, to me, dead. And I'm going to share a date with you. It was the 29th of April, 1966. We had arrived at Tainan province, which is close to Cambodia, and the operation was massive, big operation. The first day that we started walking, we had gotten there. The first day, the second day, early in the morning, we started walking. And as I was walking, I saw like some movement, and I told the guy who was in charge of the squad that I had seen it, to call for a stop, and that I would low crawl to where I thought I saw something moving. And I did low crawl, and the grass was all step under is fresh. So somebody was there, somebody was standing there. And I went back, reported it, and then we stayed there for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and then we started walking again. We get to the edge of the jungle. And one part had a horseshoe formation. And the lieutenant said to the sergeant who was in charge of our platoon, walk, all you men, in that open space. I think that's the wrong idea. I said, no, do it. I don't think there's going to be any problem. And when we got about 30 yards from the edge of the jungle, fire opened up. And I got hit on the steel pot. You wear a steel pot and a helmet liner. And the steel pot went flying, and I went down to the ground. And luckily, I hit like a little dent in the dirt, on the earth. And I dropped there. The rifle hit the dirt, and I started fired 3 rounds, and that was it. And I started beating on the rifle, and then about 50,000 times hit, and finally I started firing again. And I was looking about 10 yards away to a very close friend. And I saw him firing, And, you know, the fire thing kept on going, and about 15 minutes, for me was an eternity, but 15 minutes later, they were calling ceasefire. And then I heard a voice saying, "Don't crawl over here, don't crawl." So I don't crawl to where he was at. And he was a Puerto Rican lieutenant. And he said, walk down this trail. So I started walking, and the first guy that I saw was a guy from New York. He had been hit right up the edge of the nose. The eye had been blown out. And it was incredible. And the pain, he was tremendous amount of pain. Then the next guy had been hit right here, thumb was hanging, and this was being blown up. And it was like that until I got to the spot where we were going to be standing and waiting. I was waiting for the guys to come back behind me. Out of 11 men, only one came back, a guy from Pennsylvania. And then Morales was the lieutenant, came, and I asked him, how many men are we waiting for? He said, nobody, all of them are dead. So I said, can I go back to where I saw him? And he said, absolutely not, you stay here. The guy who I thought was firing, had received 35 wounds. He had 35 shells in his head. Big guy. So it was that experience that was really, really good. Yes.
Okay, oye, bajo el volumen.
Bajo el volumen. Bueno, vamos. No, eso juega. All right, I'm going to go louder. See if I can get there. But it was that experience that really brought me to the reality of what wars are all about. So, any questions?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm very appreciative, and I'm also honored to have you here at San Francisco State. This is a huge treat for us. Also, as a Palestinian, I'm also, I don't think I would be exaggerating to say that we are all very appreciative for your support for justice and for Palestine, and linking up the struggle of Puerto Rico with the struggle of the Palestinian people. This is amazing what you have been doing. I do have a particular question for you, and I was wondering, we have a very strong, as Alejandro said, that we have a very, very strong movement in support of Palestinian prisoners. At least one person of every four persons in Palestine have been imprisoned. And I was wondering if you can speak, and that's also a very big prison abolition movement in the U.S., including here in the Bay Area. And I was wondering if you can just speak about the whole question of the prison experience itself, and the whole question of the political prisoners, and we're kind of like highlighting the fate. What can we also do? So if you can talk about your own experience, and also linking it with the other prisoners.
I think when we talk about prisons, first of all, let's take the political prisoners. I had the opportunity to do time with Palestinians, and we were very close. I also I did time with some of the African American political prisoners, and I did time with other prisoners. So there was an Egyptian who was a political prisoner. I did time with him. The most painful thing for a prisoner is when he leaves prison, you're walking out, he leaves people behind. And people like Lutulu Shakur, people like Sundiara Akoli, people like Lera Pertier. I did time, I'm just mentioning three of the ones that I did time with. I did time with many other political prisoners, but I just bring three names out because of who they are, and they incarnate the other political prisoners. For example, Sekou Odinga and I were prisoners a little bit, now Sakul is out of prison, and when we find each other, the first thing that we remind ourselves is of those who will be left behind. Now, there's this thing in this country. I said this is a country of laws, and there's justice in this country. Well, when they were doing the trial of John Gotti, one man who was testifying against John Gotti admitted that he had killed 19 people. And he went out to the streets. Now, ask how many people, the political prisoners who are still in prison, how many they killed. Whether it's Mumia, whether it's Leonard. But there's an answer from the government. When Leonard went before the first parole board, I was there. He came back, real sad because he had been turned down. And that was 1986. So, what happens? What is the difference between people who are not? Well, for example, they said, well, Leonard, we have him in prison. We don't care what he did. But we got him in prison. And we're not going to let him go. And it's the same thing with Sundiara. Sundiara has been in there since 72. And speaking with them, I would tell the African American community that they have lost the opportunity to be with a man very intelligent, very peaceful, but above all, with a lot of experiences that they can use in their communities. Elena Peltier, Sundiara Cohen, brother who are still in prison. If people would have the opportunity to talk with them, they will realize how good and how profoundly prepared these people are. They can share experiences that nobody else can share and lead you into a path that nobody else can lead you. Because they have a tremendous amount of experience, and they can share that experience, and that experience will give you knowledge. About a year and a half ago, I was visited by 2 young members of Black Lives Matter. And I asked them if they were in contact with the political prisoners, and they said no. And I asked them if they were willing to get in touch with them, because all they needed to do was write them a letter. And once any one of those political prisoners would receive that letter would be answered. And it would be an answer that would give them ideas already. Because they will get probably a real beautiful letter and reasons and explanations and things that they could be doing. So the importance of being able to be in touch with them, and why not be in touch with them. And the sad thing about this is that I told them that I was coming to Chicago, that I wanted to meet with them in Chicago. And in Chicago I learned that they had not written a single letter to any of the political prisoners. But I think just getting in touch with them, it's easy to approach a person in the community, another person in the community, and tell the community, hey, listen, we have this brother in prison. He had been in prison for 40 years. He had been in prison for 35 years. There was a brother who has been in prison since 1968 in Nebraska. So why can we not do something simple, something small, like writing them a letter and say, I'm here to engage with you, I would like to learn with you, I would like to, just that exchange of letters is a meaningful gesture and one that will help one of our political prisoners. Just that. But then I think that if the African American community would definitely become aware and say, I want my political prisoners out of prison, they will go through the same experience that we went through, because the only reason that the Puerto Rican political prisoners are out of prison was because a massive campaign was organized, not only in Puerto Rico, but also in the diaspora, also many of the progressive leftists in the United States, many in the world. And there's a brother here who's present, Claude Mark, and he went to prison on our case. So it is not only Puerto Ricans, he was in prison in our case. And he came out, and once he's out, he's doing things that others cannot do. So just that experience, just looking at Mark and been here, and I know that he has a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge. That can be a contribution to the struggle to get political prisoners out. And he works hard, and there's still an attempt to get our political prisoners out. And I think that it behooves every human being who loves freedom and justice and believes that freedom and justice is achievable to fight and struggle to get the political prisoners out of prison. And it's not anything big. It's something that can be done, and it's nothing that is going to incriminate any person that sends a letter to the political prisoner.
Let me interrupt you for a second. I think Oscar hit the nail on the head when he said it was a campaign and a movement. Everybody wrote letters. We ended up submitting over 200,000 letters to the White House. It took years to compile from at least 50 different cities in the U.S. as well as in Puerto Rico. We made the government change its position. They have a petition site that's only for the government. It's not change.org. It's, I forgot what it is, .gov, right? But it's, you had to have, before we started it, 30,000 signatures in 1 month for the government to take action, right? Right before we started it, they changed it to 100,000 signatures in 1 month. In the month of December of 2015, we got 108,000 signatures in 27 days, right? So it gives you an idea of the support that we needed, that got Oscar out. So appreciate everybody's help. Oscar is not out because of one person or 5 people. Oscar's out because of people like you, right? And the people in the past. I think one of the things is, just to mention, there are people like Claude Marx here, like Judith Merkinson, Merck, Pilar Mejias, right, Jennifer Beach, that were all part of the movement to free Oscar and other political prisoners. And it's because of efforts like that that Oscar is here now. Thank you.
I wanted to just let people know, and I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of it, you look online, it's a beautiful historic city, with old balconies everywhere, around the plazas. And when I went shortly before Oscar was released, on every one of those balconies, there was a lifestyle cut out of his photograph on every one of those, everywhere he was, everywhere he was out. All of those came together to support his freedom. So it shakes all of us, and a lot of times we feel hopeless and helpless, and there's all these indignities out there, and all these injustices, and what can we do? We can all do something. And you young people have time, hopefully, in your future, pick something. Something bothers you, something is wrong, and focus on that. And, you know, in the 70s, these crazy dirty hippies were collecting garbage in their house, and everyone said they were crazy, because they were on his disciples. And they said it's impossible, it's too much work, and we couldn't do it. And they did it. Now worldwide, right? Same people with the same people, very disabled people in the military. Head up that, you know, our lives are even smaller than they have to be, because we can't go anywhere, we can't use the bathroom, we can't do anything. And people would say, You think we're gonna change everything for you guys? You're crazy. No way. It's everywhere. So please, please, feel the power you have and use it. You can make a difference.
Thank you. We actually, Oscar wanted to finish because we didn't answer the question, is how did you get through it? Like mentally, but he wanted to talk a little bit about that.
When I arrived at the first penitentiary, I made myself a promise not to give my time to the jailers, but to give my help to the jailers or the prison system. So I would wake up in the morning, start my morning thanking life for giving me the things that life has given me. And from that moment on, I would say to myself, do not let hatred and fear enter your heart. And from that moment on, I would start my exercise routine. And from that moment on, I would try to do throughout the day whatever I had on the agenda for that day. You know, it would be like helping inmates who probably needed some help. The first 5 years in prison, it was an open population. So in those 5 years, I teach Spanish to people who wanted to learn Spanish, or English to those who wanted to learn English. Sometimes help them to be in touch with people in the outside world. And also, just taking care of myself and being in contact with as many people on the outside world as I could. In 1986, I was added a 15-year sentence, and I was sent in 1986 to the penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, and that same year, Amnesty International declared what was happening in Marion a legal crime, and it was a legal crime. The way that we're packed in there, the way that we're kept in the cells for 22 hours and 45 minutes, it started already to create another problem for me, a problem of how I was going to face that particular reality. And when I got resentenced with a 15-year sentence, I was sent back to Marion to the same conditions, but this time they placed me in the Aryan Brotherhood. They usually put people in gangs and in different units. I was placed in the Aryan Brotherhood, in the unit where the Aryan Brotherhood were the big number of inmates. I was sent there primarily because they thought that I would get into some kind of trouble with the Aryan Brotherhood. And I had been there like probably 3 days, and I'm reading an Irish newspaper. And one of the Aryan Brotherhood goes by, he sees me reading the Irish newspaper, and he asked me. And I told him why I would read it. And he said, can I read it after you? I said, of course. And you can keep it, pass it around. And little by little, that relationship became more of a solid. I didn't look at the person as a person. I looked at his humanity. And little by little, we were engaged. We would talk about different things. We would talk about struggles. We would talk about the Irish struggle. So it is a way, little by little, that we learn and we become to survive those environments. To be kept in an environment, monochromatic, one single color, 22 hours and 45 minutes a day affects us. We have evolved as human beings with colors, first of all, with colors, and with fresh air, and with the sun. But if you are only taken out of that unit for 1 day a week for 2 hours, you're not having access to the sun. And if there's no fresh air coming into that institution, you're also being deprived of access to fresh air. and then you're deprived to a lot of things. During the time that I was under those conditions, I never touched one of the people that would come, or members of my family who would come to visit me. It was them on one side with a telephone, I on the other side with the telephone, and two guards listening to whatever was being said. My niece came to see me once, and my niece has the habit of putting her legs like this, and you're kind of pushing up. She had pants on, not a dress, and the guard came and told me if she doesn't put her legs down, I am going to terminate this visit. And all she was doing is kind of sitting in a comfortable position for her. People have different ways of sitting. And this piece of shit comes and tells me that he's going to terminate the visit because of that. And so now my niece is so embarrassed. So those are the things, little things, not big things, that we have to deal with. They had a habit of us being stripped before we would go into the visiting room. Okay, the whole body. Open your mouth, do this, do that. When we would be asked, this is one of the things, to go to our testicles. Once in a while, you have one of these disgraceful individuals, and it happened once, and it happened twice. The guy would say, "Hey, Oscar, I didn't look in your mouth that good." So now I have touched myself, and he wanted to put it. This is the mindset of that individual, and I refused. And I said, well, and there was another guy who had a lot of respect for me, and he said, "Lopez, you don't have to do that, dress up." And from that day on, only one more, and they took him out because they knew that there was going to be a problem. One of the things that I did in prison with the jailers, I would make it abundantly clear that it was not a game. That if anything would happen to me, they would pay. Somebody was going to pay, because we had the wherewithal to do that. And there's nothing, they asked me if I was threatening them. No, I'm giving you a piece of advice. From the first day that I arrived to be interviewed in Leavenworth by the staff, it was 10 days after I had been there, and this man starts talking to me, and he says, one of the things that that they didn't want me in Leavenworth, that I belong in the lockdown unit. At that time, it was just one lockdown unit in Marion, and where I belong was in lockdown unit in Marion. And all of a sudden he says, "We're going to do this. We're going to know which hand you use to clean yourself with." And when it came my turn to talk, to respond to him, I said, "Well, listen, if you have a problem with my hands, I'm ambidextrous. I use both hands, so that you can scratch." But then I went on and explained to them that it's not going to be easy to do anything to me, because there will be a fair price to pay. And for almost 36 years, 12 days short of being in prison for 36 years, I never stopped. And I demanded respect from the jailers. So it is a question of how we, little by little, the issue of colors. This is an Aryan brother who asked me, "Why, hey, start painting, do this," and I paint. He said, I'll help you with it. They put me in the hole for 67 days, and I came back, and I had been in the hole, and when I came back, I went to the Aryan Brotherhood guy and asked him if the offer was still good to help me a little bit with the painting process. And he said, yeah. That day I got an ordering form. The order was for $186, and a month later I got canvas, I got the paints, I got the brushes. The same day, the brother who was there, at 6 o'clock at night, I heard the guards so and so, back up, you're going to a different unit. That was the guy who was gonna help me learn how to paint. So, little by little, once I get an idea in my head, I'm gonna go through with it. So I started practicing to paint. And that's how I use colors. And luckily, little by little, I fell in love with painting, and to this day, I can still paint it. But those are the things that help us. The last one I'm going to mention is the first 58 days in the Supermax in Florence, Colorado. That's the hardest and most difficult penitentiary in the United States. For 58 days, they were waking me up every half hour. Now, any person who's been awakened, and without sleep for 2 or 3 days, your body temperature changes, and it's cold, hot, palpitation of the heart accelerates. But I started thinking, and when I was in Vietnam doing guard duty, there would be 2 of us. There was always 2, and everybody was impaired, right? One guy would sleep, the other one would be awake. Time to wake up the other guy so he could go to sleep. But I started thinking that it was never an hour. I would be awakened, and I realized that it was never an hour. I would fall asleep, but it wouldn't be an hour because I would just drop, and it would probably take me 10 minutes before I would fall asleep. So I said, well, if I did that in Vietnam, probably I can survive this shit. And I had learned how to do deep breathing exercises. So when you do deep breathing exercises, you relax, and you can definitely, your body's not going to change, your heart is not going to be palpitating. So that's how I survived the 58 days. On the 58th day, the warden of ADX came to the cell. I said, hey, Lopez, I'm going to change the count. It's going to be, from now on, a regular count, starting today. But I want you to do something. I want you to tell people on the outside world to stop the campaign, because on the outside world, they had organized a real solid campaign to end the torture in ADS. And it was effective. It was a very effective campaign, because sometimes one of the things that they did was to start calling the institution for, starting in the East Coast and going all the way to the West Coast, and it tied up the communication at the institution. They were not getting, when that was happening, they were not getting through. So automatically, they realized that they had a problem in their hands, and they decided to go into a regular count. So when he said that to me, I asked him if he was a man of his word, and he said yes. Well, I'm a man of my word. Today, I will write a letter notifying the people on the outside world to stop the campaign. I wrote the letter, and there's a little newspaper in New Mexico. The Nuclear Resistor is a group of people who are against nuclear war, bombs. So, 9 days later, I got the letter. I got the newspaper with the letter, photocopy of the letter, printed on the first page. The same day, I had just finished reading the newspaper when the person who was the unit manager shows up. They pop the door open, there's bars that separate us, and he's with his hands behind his back, and he says, hey Lopez, you lied to the warden. And right there, his last name was Sosa. I said, Sosa, we've talked about this before. When you come in here and you call me a liar, you disrespected me, and we've talked about this, I will not tolerate disrespect. And so I said, but by the way, here's this newspaper, read that little letter that is there. We read the letter, I said, can I take the newspaper to the warden? I said, no, let's do better. Tell the warden that it's a gift from me to him. But I survived the 58 days. So that gives us an example of how we can survive, how can, but then we have inmates, we have prisoners. 35%, that's when I was in prison, 35% of the inmates have mental problems, mental issues. And 8 months, just to give you an idea, before I came home, they had in Terre Haute, Indiana, they had a unit for inmates with some kind of mental problem or mental issue. And on 8 months, a Native American took out his side, took it out completely. And you know, it's really painful for those of us who are behind bars, because we know, you know, that if something was going, something was off, something was wrong, but he took completely, and I never saw him again. 4 months later, another Native American in the same unit took out one of his testicles. So these are the things that happen in prison. And there was a big newspaper article in 2012 about this inmate in the same institution in Flores, Colorado, in Supermax, ate his little finger. So those are the things that you seldom hear about. But how does a human being, in a dehumanizing process, what is a human being going to do? And sometimes they start attacking themselves. You see them with all kinds of cards, you see them with, and they're very dangerous too, because if one day they woke up and they can make a shank, they're going to kill somebody. So those are the realities, that's the reality. But fortunately, and I consider myself a very fortunate person, I was able to deal with everything that they threw my way during all those years that I was behind bars. I think that I was blessed. I think that I was, in a way, prepared to face those challenges.
So we have another question right here, and just to get a sense, how many other people have questions? Well, you can.
Sorry. So what can we do to help with Puerto Rico getting their independence and freedom?
Okay, right now we're starting a campaign, a more defined campaign to decolonize Puerto Rico. The decolonization process has to go through the UN General Assembly.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to get support, as much support, and probably more than anything else, we'll be getting letters from people that we can take to the General Assembly. We will definitely begin to go worldwide, use probably the same people, same organizations who gave us support in Vieques, who gave us support to the Puerto Rican prisoners, and try to get to the General Assembly the message that in 1953, the General Assembly accepted the farce that the United States government put out, saying that Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico now was called Estado Libre Asociado de Puerto Rico, the free associated state of Puerto Rico. There is no such thing. There is no such thing as a free associated state. But the United States government used that, alleging that because of that and because of the Constitution that was behind it, that Puerto Ricans had exercised the right of self-determination, and that the case of Puerto Rico should be taken out of the list of countries that had not achieved their decolonization, achieved their freedom and their independence. And Puerto Rico was taken out. And that's how, we've been carried out since 1953, thanks to because they knew it was a lie. The pressures that the United States could exercise And that was probably the primary reason that they chose to do what they did. But also, in 1988, Resolution 4347 was passed, alleging that Puerto Rico was going to be an independent, the world, during the decade of the 90s, colonialism was going to be erased, and we were hoping that, well, if colonialism is going to be erased, let's hope that Puerto Rico gets its independence and sovereignty based on that. The decade of the 90s passed, and not a single colonized nation got its independence. And now we're still waiting for that to happen. And we want the General Assembly to rectify what it did in 1953, and I think we got a good case to argue with. It doesn't mean that the General Assembly is going to do us the favor of decolonizing Puerto Rico, but we want to take it to them. They are the body that is responsible to make sure that colonialism is eliminated in the world.
So more to the point, here in the U.S., there is a campaign, and it's to the presidential, this is the year of the elections, right, by various organizations and coalitions, that is, what is your Puerto Rico policy? In other words, how do we put this on the public stage? Because change doesn't happen without pressure from the grassroots.
That's right.
Right, so one thing we did have historically happen was, for the first time ever in the history of Puerto Rico-U.S. relationships, 5 Democratic presidential candidates came out and said, what? Cancel the debt. Something that 6 years ago we thought was impossible. $74 billion, Wall Street, hedge funds, nobody was going to give up a penny. 5 candidates have said, and they are Bernie Sanders, Warren, Camila, Kristen Kilbrand, and Andrew Yang, right? At one point or another have said, without necessarily a mass movement. So to your point, the education of U.S. citizens and people that reside in the U.S. around the issue of Puerto Rico, like any other issue, has to take place. What can we do, all right, to complement the international campaign is, how do we get the ball rolling about demanding that the U.S. government, which is the government that invaded Puerto Rico on July 25th, 1898, is responsible for saying, okay, I have to start a process. There's an international procedure, right, about a plebiscite. Eritrea, Southwest Africa have already gone through it historically, but the point is that. And the other part is, what is the role that Puerto Ricans in the U.S. have to play historically and in that process? Sure.
Jaime, didn't you have your hand?
If the students, there's no students, I'd like to ask a question. But the students, they plan. Following Alejandro's remarks, our struggle, Puerto Rico's struggle, has gone through different stages, and it's been a long period. And many times when I speak about it in class, usually I start with the question, how many people here know about Puerto Rico? Very few. But then when I ask them, do they know about Despacito? Everybody knows. And that has been true in much of my travels. So I wanted to raise a question in terms of the mass struggle. Can you speak about the events this period where the struggle in Puerto Rico has led to the resignation of the governor and the mass and the new young generation that now is taking up the banner of the struggle for independence, which we, the older generation, so if you can speak about that?
In July of last year, little by little, young people started moving this campaign. It was based on conversations that the governor of Puerto Rico at that time was having, and the way that he was talking was very, very, very vicious, very anti-Puerto Rican, very anti-women, very anti-anything that they did not like. It was like people didn't matter, and they would call if there was a woman who was a political leader, they would call her a prostitute, and they would say that they would be willing to kill them if they needed to kill them. One of the comments was that if Puerto Ricans were kicked out of Puerto Rico, Puerto Rico would be more beautiful. And these are Puerto Ricans. This is the governor of Puerto Rico. So all of a sudden, more and more young people, and in about a week, the marches and standing in Fortaleza, which is the building where all these people kind of hang out and work, supposed to be working, but they hang out for them. All of a sudden, there was this movement, a very, very, very strong movement. And the beauty of it was the strength, that energy that emanated from these young people, especially young Puerto Rican women. And it was so beautiful. I mean, I have problems with my feet, and I would stand there for hours and I would feel nothing, because it was so energetic and it's so beautiful. And one of the slogans that they used, somos muchos, pero no tenemos miedo. And the whole thing of colonization is fear. The colonizer inculcates in us fear, and we internalize it. And all of a sudden, those young people had no fear whatsoever. I mean, it was beautiful, 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 well organized. The chief of police said, well, you know, there will be blood if you continue this. And all of a sudden, he realized that he didn't have the power. That because it's thousands of young Puerto Ricans. There was one day where a bunch of motorcyclists got into Viejo San Juan, but they would go all over it, jumping with motorcycles. But you imagine about 3,000 people on motorcycles, and usually the people who use motorcycles, they're big. And so these are humongous Puerto Ricans, and they would go where the police was, and at least the police was intimidated by that. So all of a sudden, they started getting more and more energy. And then they called for a march on the expressway. He said, so humongous, you got 4 lanes on one side, 4 lanes on the other. And that expressway was full, I mean, wall to wall on both sides of Puerto Ricans demanding that this governor end his stay in office. And that day, automatically, anyone, even the people of his own party, called for him to renounce his governorship. But it was so beautiful, and it was raining. I mean, I was pouring the rain, and we were walking on the rain, but the energy was there, the people were there. People that I had not seen in years were there. And I said, wow, this is going to be a very, very productive walk today. And soon after that, it ended.
I just wanted to also mention that it wasn't just people in Puerto Rico. We had organized people from all over the Puerto Rican diaspora. I mean, we had Boricuas supporting the resignation of Ricardo Rosselló in Milan, in Paris, in all over the U.S. So it wasn't just Puerto Rico, it was literally an international campaign that Puerto Ricans organized. And I also think it's important to note that it's the first time in history that a coup has been successful without any bloodshed. There was no deaths, there was no killing. It was all the youth, artistically and creatively, took out the governor. So I just want to make that point. And any support to help Puerto Rico, I mean, follow Oscar on the social media, the National Boricua Human Rights Network, keep informed how you can help. So I just want to say we appreciate your support.
Some of those demonstrations were right here in San
That we organized them.
City Hall, and in downtown Oakland in front of City Hall, and Lake Merritt. So it happened locally as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Katina.
Thank you. Thank you, Margarita and Alejandro, for bringing us all together today. And, you know, you spoke, Oscar, about the importance of contact with political prisoners, and I just want to thank you for coming and sharing some time with us today, right? And, you know, really important points were made about how Oscar isn't here today because of one person. He's not here today because of one individual act of Obama, right? It was a community struggle. It was an international struggle, as Margarita was saying, right? In terms of ousting the governor of Puerto Rico. And that's the power of our community, right? And as you said, somos muchos y no tenemos miedo. We're many and we don't have fear, right? So thank you all for coming out today. Thank you for the professors who brought their students. Thank you for the broader community, alumni who are here today. And thank you to all the faculty who asked really brilliant questions as well. So thank you all. And I think you would stay here for a couple of minutes to, if folks want to just take a picture or just, you know, have a word or two. Right? Thank you.